Welcome to another episode of 3.5 Cast. I'm your host, Mike, and with me tonight are Debatra,
Hey guys.
Troacted,
That's me.
and Fantasy Pen.
Hello.
And tonight we're going to be talking about one of the races from Races of Destiny, the Illumians. They're one of the races that get a whole chapter dedicated to them, so the writers thought they must have been pretty fun. And I think they're pretty interesting, and I think a lot of other people do too. So that's why we're talking about them tonight. So basically, the physical description, they kind of just look like humans. Not too interesting there as far as physical descriptions go. However, they do have some floaty runes about their head, which ties into how they were made through the ritual of words made flesh, which was how the Illumian race broke away from humans in the first place. So they kind of consider the humans as a brother race, but they still distance themselves from humans along with everybody else. The Illumians break themselves into these cabals of societies rather than spreading out and making cities and everything. They can also be found in human cities, generally within their own segregated areas, like a single building, or less commonly, but perhaps in a very large city, they could even have their own district. But they wouldn't really mingle, it would just be Illumians.
I think there's
Another.
something like that in Sharn.
Go on.
I think there's something like that in Sharn and Ebron. There's like a district. There's like just a whole Illumian neighborhood somewhere.
That's cool. Ebron is on one of my to learn lists. So yeah, one funny thing about since I'm mentioning the other races is that they treat the smaller races, such as halflings and gnomes, uh, almost paternally, and they kind of like cast them off like, "Oh, you little things, like dilly dally way, play your games, carry on," with much disdain. It's kind of amusing. And also the fact that Illumians have some obligatory need to wear the most expensive clothes they can afford. I think that's a rather amusing piece of fluff. The book even mentions that poor ones try to wear whatever they can, and then they use makeup in strange ways. So if they have already made it for their cabal, the more makeup they wear, that means leave me alone, man. Like all the makeup in the world, that means like leave me alone. I don't want to interact with you. I'm good. So definitely some distinct ways that they can be picked apart from humans, since they generally look like them. Otherwise, although I do believe it mentions that like over half of them are bald also, and facial hair is very, very rare. So that can kind of give you a more mental image of how they might be different than humans.
Well, the main thing, of course, is that they've got these, floating, glowing power sigils around their heads that glow like candles, and they can't turn them off unless they take a special feat to do.
Yes, and I don't know, do you guys want to jump right into that? Because there's so much to say about those sigils.
They are cool.
They are indeed very cool.
I mean, that's kind of like the biggest single feature of the Illumians are these sigils.
Yeah.
So why don't we jump into that? Troac, did you want to start us with that?
So basically, these power sigils aren't just for looking cool. They also like do magic stuff. Uh, there's some of the sigils are non-functional, but every Illuminant has at least one, and usually two sigils that have some sort of functional effect. And there's six different ones that are given in Races of Destiny. There's uh, Aish, Hoon, Crow, Nain, Ur, and Ball, if I'm pronouncing those correctly, which I think I am. And each of them gives bonuses to different things. Um, and if you have two of them, then they combine to form a word in the Illuminated language. So, for example, Nainhoon is a word. And if you have both the Nain sigil and the Hoon sigil, then they combine and they give you an additional effect, which in this case is similar to the Divine Metamagic feat in Complete Divine. Slightly. Great, great. Well, basically, it's a sigil combination that is if you have those two sigils, it's similar to divine meta magic. You can spend turn undead attempts to apply meta magic for free. Or, for example, the Valor sigil. If you combine those two, then you can expend a spell slot as a swift action and get a bonus to your unarmed strike damage or sneak attack damage for 1 round. Basically, you get these power sigils. Each one does something on their own, and then when you have two of them, they combine together to do something extra.
Okay,
Alright.
so with that out of the way, I think that's a pretty good overview. I think that the only way that we could really go into more depth is if we went into every single one and exactly what they do, and I don't think that would lend itself to a very interesting cast. So how about
Probably not.
yeah?
It would be much easier to simply say that each individual rune gives bonuses on different skill checks, except for one, Crow, which translates to magic, which gives a bonus on caster level.
Yeah, so H gives a bonus to strength checks and strength-based skill checks, which notably includes checks to, trip or bull rush, handy for melee characters. Hoon gives a bonus to both wisdom checks and constitution checks, as well as the skill checks associated with them. So that includes like concentration as well as your spot and listen. Crow gives a bonus to caster level, but only up to a maximum of your hit dice. So it's similar to Practice Spellcaster, the feat that gives you bonus to caster level, but only like if you multi-class and lose caster levels that way. And then there's Nain for intelligence, Ur for dexterity, and Vol for charisma.
Also worth noting is that the Ur dexterity rune, it does also give its bonus to initiative checks.
Yeah,
It's a very bad
sometimes
passage.
and similarly, Vol gives a bonus to charisma checks, which includes turning checks, as well as checks to control people with charmed person, or checks to make bargains with planar binding.
They are, in short, the ultimate skill monkey race, because they get a +2 to basically whatever they want.
Basically,
Though they
yeah.
can't change their runes.
So, like, how all those races that give like a +2 ratio bonus to whatever skill, like halflings get climb and jump and move silently. Illumians like, yeah, just pick a bunch of skills and get +2 bonus to all of them. We don't care. You can get every skill, whatever.
Well, I have some things to say about their psychology if we are ready to move on from the runes. So, I find that if you're familiar with Goliath, and I know we haven't gone over Goliath, but if you're familiar with Goliath, there's actually a lot of similarities there between them. I found it very interesting the first time I read it because I had to go back and reread Goliath because I'm like, wait, this sounds really familiar. So the Illumians, they just need to understand everything. They need to master it, and uh, they end up kind of feeling like they're the most superior in their own way. And since they have their cabals and they're isolated, it's so similar to the Goliaths, who are kind of a jack of all trades. They can do everything. They're really like hardy people. They live off in the wilderness on their own. I just found it so amusing, and I just wondered if it was the same main writer behind the concept that maybe just didn't feel like they had properly hit that sweet spot that they were looking for with the first race. I forget which one came first now, but it's just really amusing in that manner that they're kind of similar if you read them side by side. The biggest difference there would be that the Goliaths are more humble and they care more about each other than the Illuminans. The Illuminans are very much a I want to be the best. I need to prove I'm better than all the other people. Even though they're also very friendly with everyone, there's definitely that drive to be the best. And depending on what sort of cabal they're in, that can play out in different ways. And I'm sure we'll get to the cabals, but there's probably a lot more to say about how they interact with one another before we reach that point.
Well, I personally like the Cabals as like a potential story hook because, like back in the history of Illumians, the way that they first split off of humans is there was this guy named Tarmuid who developed this magic ritual, this language that was like special or magic or whatever, and he created this. So they're called the ritual of words made flesh, and basically it turned a human into an Illumian, which is like merging with power language or something. Uh, and eventually, like he was like, well, we got enough Illumians, so we probably don't need this ritual anymore. And they split it into a bunch of pieces, and they gave one piece to each cabal. And so, like, the cabals each have a piece of the ritual, and theoretically, if they all came together, they could, like do the ritual again. But they don't actually need to, because Illumians are now a true breeding race, so they can just reproduce on their own.
Which brings up some pretty interesting possibilities when you think about it. Since Illumians are they're really more the words made flesh than they are a human offshoot. If you wanted, you could theoretically have Illumians that are descended from any race, really, especially if your setting doesn't have humans. You could have elven Illumians, lizard folk. A particularly interesting one might be descended of giants.
Ooh, interesting thought.
In theory, sure.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I like about the fact that they tie into language is that they also make really good true namers, because the true namer class relies on the true speak skill. And
not that you should ever play a true namer.
Yes, but here's the thing: Illumians make better true namers than almost anybody else, relatively speaking, because they're the only race in the game that gets a racial bonus to true speak.
Indeed.
And they should, because they're based on words, right? So makes sense.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. As I was reading these lore sections of the Illumian chapter, my mind just kept going back and back to the True Namer, because I have actually played the True Namer before. It's not quite as bad at low levels, but it's still pretty bad.
The other thing that I like to use Illumians for is they've got this theme where they just love multi-classing. Like often Illumians will just, dip around, oh, I'll take a class here, I'll take a class there. And this is reinforced by the sigil combinations, which really support multi-class combos. Like, you can spend a spell slot from your spellcasting class to gain a bonus to your sneak attacks from your rogue class, because you got both classes. Or the Crown Sigil, which gives a bonus to your caster level, but only if you multi-class.
You could also use Eishkrau and scale your bonus spells off of your strength score.
Right, yeah, there's the two sigil combos, Eishkrau and Urkrau. One of them lets you use strength for your bonus spells instead of your normal stat. The other one lets you use dex.
Yes.
So when I see Illumian brought up on the boards, it's usually in regards to a Gish build. As I've said, I've never actually used the Illumium, but how well do you think that works? Just going for the, no specific Gish build in mind, but just generally, how well does that work?
They definitely have support for it. The only time I've actually played an Illumian, it was a runecaster, actually. So I played more as a primary spellcaster / item crafter than a proper Gish.
It's a pretty good combination, or a good class for the combination, because the H-Crow combo is just really strong for letting you prioritize strength above the way you normally prioritize your casting stat. Just pump up your strength as high as you get, and you still get bonus spells from it.
Yes.
Though it should be noted, it does nothing for your save DCs.
Yeah.
That is the frustrating truth. But if you focus on buffing spells or spells that don't rely on save DCs like Raise, well, that doesn't really matter.
Right. There's also a popular sort of meme build that you see floating around sometimes. Like the muscle wizard, there's this disease in Book of Vile Darkness that's rather notorious. It's called festering anger. And what it does is every day your strength increases by +2, but you get like some drawback. And if you can just, ignore the drawback somehow, then you keep pumping your strength. And because you're an Illumian, you use your strength to set your bonus spells, and you have like unlimited spells. So it's like, I cast Fist, pow.
I can't believe I never combined that with Illumian before. That's funny.
Yeah.
Funny enough, though, the combo that I see with it more often is actually with Mystic Theurge, because Illumian is one of the best races for Mystic Theurge, or other sort of multi-class spellcaster build, like bar none. And this is because of their Crow Sigil, particularly a feat called Improved Sigil Crow, which they can take to improve their Crow Sigil, just like it sounds. Um, what it does is you pick one or two of your spells that has verbal components, and then it's automatically heightened by a level. It counts as one level higher whenever you cast it. But that, it counts as a level higher for every purpose, so it lets you qualify for prestige classes like Mystic Theurge ahead of schedule.
Huh. I actually never caught that before. That's huh, that's definitely something to look into.
Yeah, part of the reason why it's really good is because it also boosts your caster level for both classes. It's like taking practice spellcaster twice, and also getting early entry to your prestige class. And for something like Mystic Theurge, where you might need certain class skills or to get in at level 3, you can take Able Learner, which is a feat for humans only, but Illumians count as humans, so they can take it.
I wouldn't say that the Kraus sigil is 100% as good as practice spellcaster, because that still gives 3 levels to 1/2.
Yes,
Or
but for Mystic Theurge it is, because you're not
Oh,
losing off
yeah.
a level.
True.
So how about those cabals, huh? It's pretty interesting stuff. And there's a lot of different types of cabals. I remember when I was reading it for the first time, I kept expecting that section to end, but no, it just kept going on and on. There's so many different types of cabals. The basic uh, the features of the cabal that don't change from within are the fact that they're run by a council of elders, and the council is known as a black table. So depending on which type of cabal you're in, the black table is going to change. And the number in the black table differs as well. But the directors make day-to-day decisions to keep the cabal running, and it's these directors that make up the black table. There's a whole lot to say about this, but the short of it is basically like they're kind of like a secret council almost, because they don't necessarily have to answer to anybody, and at the same time, the directors give out the orders. So it's kind of a sinister sounding situation, but because the Illumians are generally lawful good, lawful neutral, it's not a bad thing necessarily. Then they've also got the law keepers, which are the arbiters. They have their own justice system within the cabal. So if you do happen to have a building that's inhabited by a cabal, they may not give a crap about the laws outside of their building and just stick to whatever they say is the law within. They've also got directorates that are in charge of keeping all the lore. They're called lore keepers. Makes sense. They're more or less librarians. They're expected to keep all the knowledge of their cabal and make sure to preserve it. Sometimes the Lord Keeper can be highly regarded, possibly the most highly regarded, because again, knowledge, big thing for the Illumians. And also, what I think is probably the most interesting appointment in the Cabal is the final seed.
absolutely.
So basically, these people are unfortunate, but respected. So they have one duty, and that is to rebuild the Cabal in case something terrible happens and the Cabal is destroyed. So they're given a copy of all the most important texts so that they can start a new library if they have to, basically become the new lore keeper. So whoever is chosen as the final seed, it's a great honor, but they get kicked out of the Cabal basically. So it's like, oh, well, this sucks. Yay, I'm important. I guess, man. Shit. So a lot of different roles there, and then of course, anybody that's not taking on one of those roles, you can think would take on a normal sort of role within any given society. But yeah, what do you guys think about that stuff? Anyone's favorite role different than mine?
The thing I like,
Unfortunately, my time playing as an Illumian character didn't really get to dive into the Cabals too much.
so I explored
Unfortunately, it's
it.
the same here.
Yeah, I explored it a little bit when I was planning for a potential campaign that didn't pan out. And I had this idea of just this Illumian Cabal, except it had been infiltrated by mind flayers. So the players there'd be some piece of information that they need to get out of it, but they wouldn't realize until too late that there's this corruption going on behind the scenes.
Nice.
That's particularly amusing to me since they're supposed to be like knowledge keepers and they don't know that they're being infiltrated when there's a certain type of cabal. I forget which one now that is just that, like an infiltrating type of cabal, a chain cabal, I think it is. Yeah, they're known for their top-notch spy networks. So that's kind of funny. It would have been extra funny if the mind flayers had infiltrated a chain cabal.
It also reminds me of, like, I feel like there's just this pattern of where they make races that are like really close to humans, but slightly different because they have some sort of minor magical powers. And they just, they have their own little secret society, and they have these enclaves within human society. And it's like, sure, you got the Illumians, but you've also got the Kalashtar. They're doing their thing. And there's like the Talair from Complete Silence, the six hidden houses. Uh, and that sort of thing. It feels like they hit the same note a few different times.
Yes,
Uh,
but I think that what's just fine with that is that you can kind of take which version of that similar theme that fits for your setting or kind of just what you like about it. Kind of like how, earlier I was mentioning how the Goliaths are so similar, but they're more of a rugged outdoorsy type. So if you really like the theme of the Illumian, but you don't like the fact that they're isolated within these buildings within the city, you don't think you're going to come up with a good way to integrate them. You want, I don't know, maybe druids or something more outdoors. Then the Goliaths, very similar, but would probably fit better for you. So I think this would be a perfect time to talk about the Cabals. Uh, I am planning a campaign after my current one is resolved, a homebrew one, and one of the basically I took the core races and I replaced each one with a different race, and one of the races that I chose is Illumian, of course. So I had to pick cabals. What kind of cabals are gonna fit in the starting area? What's gonna be found later? Because I really wanted to work in this sort of thing with it, and one of the ones that I considered, I think eventually I decided not to, was the Ascension Cabal. It's kind of, I feel like, one of probably two that somehow goes against the nature of the Illumian. I mean, it doesn't completely, but everybody's working towards one person, one of Illumian, ascending to deity status like the very first Illumian did. So they're all trying to research exactly how to take what they have from the ritual of words made flesh and use that to ascend. But not just for anyone, for one specific person who's in charge of the cabal. And I feel like that goes against the nature of the Illumian because everyone is supposed to be like the master of it. They're supposed to be better than each other person, and they're supposed to prove it. So, I mean, I can see how, oh, I was the one to get him to ascend. I'm the best. Makes some sense, but it's still like proving that someone else is better than you by succeeding. So I don't know. It's an interesting concept, but I do kind of feel like it's somehow, I don't know, working against themselves.
Do you think Illumians are like notorious grammar Nazis? Like, you gotta figure.
Definitely.
Oh, absolutely.
Definitely. They are literal words made flesh. I don't think they have any. I don't think there's any way to play them but that way.
And then another one. Go on.
As far as the Ascension Cabal, I do see where you're going with that, but considering how much competition there is within just between Illumians, combined with their apparent universal vanity, I can definitely see them. I mean, the description of the Cabal itself seems to imply that they're started by the individual in question and basically solicit volunteers. But I can definitely see a variation of the Ascension Cabal where they're all basically competing to see which one of them gets to ascend.
I
Well,
think
one
that
thing,
makes more sense. But yeah, go ahead, Tracted.
one thing we haven't touched on yet is that Illumians, they have their own religion, and they've got their own pantheon of deities. But unlike most other races, every single Illumian deity was supposedly once a mortal who ascended to godhood. So, um, it's a thing that's happened before multiple times over the years. There's like half a dozen different deities, including Tarnwood, the first Illumian who originally ascended to godhood and became the patron of the race or whatever.
And I feel like like that's where like the crux of my argument lies. Like, why would they help someone else ascend if they felt they were the best and could prove it and ascend themselves? That's where I feel like it's counterintuitive.
Well, I figure they still ultimately have the human subtype, so they've still got a little bit of that individualism that comes with the human race. So even though they got these tendencies towards lawfulness and competitiveness, they can still break the mold, and they're still vulnerable to psychology.
Fair enough.
Also, potentially worth mentioning, it's a bit pedantic, but considering what species we're dealing with here, I think that's actually more appropriate. I just glanced down the list, and all of these ascended Illumians from Tarmuid on down, none of them are actual gods per se. Each of them is listed as a demigod.
Yes, well, don't tell the Illumians that; they'll probably get all huffy.
I think that's a 3.5 or third edition mechanic. Ascended mortals usually don't rise above demigod.
I'm not familiar with that particular aspect.
Something the deities and demigods books about divine rank.
Yeah.
So shall we move on to chain cabals?
Certainly.
All right.
So
I actually don't know what those are.
So the chain cabal, I do believe, is one of the two cabals that I chose for my campaign. So basically, the chain cabal, they're what I started mentioning before. They have these spy networks. They infiltrate nearby power centers, so you're very likely to find a chain cabal in a city near the government. So if there's like a town hall somewhere, then they're probably going to own a building close by and have their cabal there. Uh, Maybe depending if it's not inside of a human city, they could be anywhere that's important. Like say there's a beholder lair or a mind flayer lair, somewhere that they're nearby. They can use their spy network to kind of keep tabs on everything that's going on around them and influence however they're going to influence the immediate region. I think that each type of cabal might change the layout that I gave a brief overview of before. Um, so with this one, I think that the main leader is slightly different. I forget exactly now what the directorate is, but they do have fun little sub names for all of them. Like with the Chain Cabal, since the leader is more of a spy than anywhere else, they call the directorates beneath him the Eyes on so and so. Like Eyes on Helma Directorate. There we go. I found it.
Yeah.
Eyes on T-Mat Directorate. All these different things, whatever they're trying to keep eyes on. So like if in that last one, like if they're near a church of Tiamat, then they'll have the Eyes on Tiamat directorate, and they'll have a specific group of Illumians dedicated to keeping tabs on everything that church is doing.
Ooh, this actually reminds me of a common character archetype that I often use Illumians for. It's the urban savant prestige class from Cityscape.
That sounds like something they would do.
Yeah, it's heavily knowledge based, and in order to join it, you have to have the favored be in an organization that is dedicated to like watching the city and keeping tabs on everybody and keeping the peace and finding any threats.
Highly appropriate.
Exactly. And also, the prestige class synergizes really well with Illumian racial features because if you have the name sigil that gives +2 to all intelligence-based checks, Urban Savant, you're making a lot of knowledge checks. And Illumian just gives you +2 to every single one of those, which is very useful.
Yeah, and also shape changers are highly prized by these chain cabals, and they'll pay doppelgangers really well, for example, just to help them build their spy network. And if they can get high enough level, then they'll even have teleportation circles like laid out strategically between safe houses and places so that they can travel really quickly. It's pretty interesting. I think that it could fit into most cities pretty easily if that's what you're doing.
Now, there's just a thought, since we were discussing the potential for illuminizing other races, using the ritual of words made flesh on a changeling or some other kind of shifter race.
Ooh.
Could you hide your sigils?
Well, you have to take a feat for that.
Yeah.
Actually, I'd have to check the exact wording, but I'm pretty sure the sigils specifically say that if you shapeshift, they stick around.
Yeah,
Unless the shifting would, unless whatever form you take would cost you your supernatural abilities.
that's interesting. Research.
Actually, one of the Illumined characters I played was also a Mulharadi Divine Minion. So you do the wild shaping thing, but then you still have a little sigil floating around you the whole time, even when you're an animal. It's kind of a neat, shapeshifter towel.
That'd be funny. It's as a DM just to have a oh look, there's a squirrel on that tree. It's got some strange sigils floating around its head. Huh, that's unusual. Oh, I'm sure it's nothing, right, guys?
What do you think the odds are that the players attack the squirrel?
Pretty
100%.
uh,
Correction. 99%. There is always that 1% that will try to adopt the squirrel.
Yeah.
Well,
Might want to bump that up to 5%.
there's also
fair
a chance that they might try a bunch of divination spells on the squirrel and try to see what the heck is going on, or maybe they'll try.
Consider that part of attacking it.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
Basically, are they suspicious of it, or are they overwhelmed by the cuteness of it?
Yep, those are your only options.
well, moving on to the next type, I think is probably the most boring cabal. Unfortunately, the Eclipse Cabal. Basically, their whole shtick is that they disappear. Like the cabal is made and they disappear. They're not supposed to be found. They're just there to protect their part of the ritual of words made flesh. So I don't know. I didn't even really give this one too much thought when I was building my campaign. I'm like, yeah, I don't need a hidden cabal. Like that's not going to be too interesting. I mean, just from a lore perspective, it makes sense that the Illumians would do that. But from a injecting this into my campaign and having it participate somehow, not really all that great unless like the campaign's all about performing the ritual of words made flesh and you have to go about finding these secret cabals. I just don't really see any other sort of adventure hooks for this particular type of cabal.
Well, the thing about it is, of course, because they're hidden. It's like, aha, they were here the whole time.
Yeah.
I
Anyway,
mean, even the listed adventure hook in the book kind of it revolves around things going horribly wrong within the Enclave just to get the PC's attention.
you got to figure there's a ton of ways it can go wrong, especially if they're hiding out on like the plane of shadow. Because Lumens have like this tie to the plane of shadow for some reason. I never quite understood why.
Yeah,
But,
that doesn't make any sense.
but maybe they'd be like hiding on a plane of shadow, and then but whoops, they get lost or eaten by a shadow monster. That's a quest hook right there.
Yeah, so more interesting would be the Gauntlet Cabal. One thing that I always had trouble separating in my mind was the Chain Cabal and the Gauntlet Cabal, because so the Chain Cabal, like we talked about, network of spies, whatever, and then the Gauntlet Cabal is espionage. So it's really just a short step away from a Chain Cabal, because instead of just keeping tabs on everything and being spies, whatnot, they do that, but then also sabotage people and like steal information and such. So pretty similar. I think this is another one that'd be pretty easy to include in campaign, and I feel like the nature of the Gauntlet Cabal, even though they're not called out for it, would probably be an easy cabal to make evil, or at the very least neutral, rather than good. Whereas like most of the Illuminans seem good, you know. But I mean, when you start talking about espionage and controlling the surrounding areas, kind of starts sounding more evil.
Well, two things. One, I'm not sure where you got the thing with Illumians tending towards good alignment.
Oh, well, okay, so they can be everything. I think in my mind, despite the fact they can be everything, they're good paladins. They work as paladins, so I think of them as lawful good. That's my own bias, I think.
Eh,
Yeah.
eh. But the other thing, there is an actual distinguishable difference between the Chain and Gauntlet cabals. And honestly, there's a popular quote that you'll see in a couple of people's signatures on the Playground forums about the nature of neutral versus evil. Neutral looks out for number one, evil does that while squashing number two. And that, I think, is the difference between these two cabals. The Gauntlet Cabal, they use espionage as a means of control, according to this part. So they're the ones looking out for number one. The Chain Cabals, they're spying on everyone else to make sure they don't get uppity. The Gauntlet looks out for number one. The Chain keeps an eye on number two.
And you can understandably see that the Gauntlet Cabals would have more enemies too, since they have a more active role in their region. So probably easier to get the Gauntlet Cabal involved in a plot.
Honestly, the thing I like about the Illuminate Cabals is that as the DM, you can kind of just, come up with a cool concept for one of them and just toss it in there. Like, you could have your Illuminate Cabal that's dedicated to protecting nature, and his druids is that actually one of the ones they suggest?
Yeah, that's a different one actually.
Well, maybe you have like uh, the keepers of the cerulean sign from Lords of Madness. It's
There we
this
go.
order that protects the world from aberrations. Uh, and maybe they're an Illumian cabal. Or, any other organization. Like the Shadowcraft mages are normally like a gnome thing, but maybe they're an Illumian cabal. Could be anything. You can be creative with these.
Definitely. I think that's why I like the Illumians so much. Is the fluff is really really good. You can do so much with it.
Personally, I really just like the visual. Um, it gives them this cool hook of having the runes floating around their head, and makes them visually distinct from humans while still being, recognizable and related, like Star Trek aliens.
Well, moving on to the next type of cabal
Yeah.
is the. Did you want to say something?
No, I was just gonna go off into those. The next one.
Oh, go for it. Take it.
Yeah. The Gibber Cabals. These, I think, conceptually are my favorites. They definitely have a bit of a mad scientist vibe to them. Basically, literally trying to invent new words in the Illumian language, as just as the original Illumian did, just by just stringing together random syllables and seeing what happens.
I'm sure nothing
Combine.
will go wrong there.
Oh,
This is the sort of
absolutely.
cabal. This is the sort of
Especially
cabal
if
that
you
just
mix it with true speak.
yeah, they'll just keep a garbler in their basement, right? And then that's gonna cause all sort of problems. Or gibbering mouther.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like that gibbering mouther is what happens when an Illumian in the gibber cabal just goes wrong. It's like, oh, somebody spontaneously gibbered again.
Oh man, not again. All right.
And their
Uh,
directories or well, other cabals actually have some type of logic behind their naming styles. These guys intentionally assume nonsensical names for themselves and their directories and all their cabal functions. Whether it's a rhyming scheme or just even just gibberish.
well, Boo Boo, it's your turn to clean up the gibbering mouther in the basement. Ah, why me? I did it last time.
So the next one is the second one that I mentioned, kind of going against what I saw as their own nature, because Illumians are brought up as being anti-undead. They hate undead, which is a fairly common thing in D&D in general. But since they're called out for it, of course there has to be an exception. So there's the Grave Whisper Cabals, and they speak their Illumian to the dead, speakers of the dead. Um, yeah, it gets kind of creepy because they keep their elders alive after death by turning them into liches and vampires, etc., etc. So, one thing that always kind of I thought was strange is then wouldn't the black table just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger if they have to? Well, I guess they could just never. It's either sorry, either it keeps getting larger because they elect new living members and then also have the undead ones, or they have the exact same members forever because they're undead and they're not going to die. So kind of an interesting concept there.
Or maybe just not everyone's important enough to be kept around.
Yeah, but then wouldn't they reach this point where the entire black table is just undead and nobody's ever going to join it again? Right?
Yeah.
Uh, in those situations, having set terms of office is probably the way to go. Which brings up some very interesting ideas for that Empire of the Undead I've been working on for my homebrew campaign.
Well,
So what else we got? We got the quill cabals, which are like they do like libraries and writing and books and stuff.
yes. Uh, they're probably not all that interesting because they're more like, well, basically what you just said, directed. Like they're librarians and everything, researching. They're probably going to be a more peaceful type, so not too many good adventure hooks. I think the one that they have in the book is that just explorers found some ancient culture and the Illumians want to investigate it. It's not even really about them, It's just what they do. Learn
Well,
more.
it could be a good resource for the players if they need some obscure knowledge. Maybe the local quill cabal has, the stuff buried in their library somewhere, and you got to research it.
I can only imagine what life must be like for the Quill Cabal's last seed, because I imagine that one more than any would have to keep coming back to get updated documents.
Yeah,
It's
that's a good point.
like, am I even exiled? I keep coming back every week.
Or they have to like keep sending out a new member. Do they let the old person back in then?
Or they go on vacation for a week and they come back and their inbox is just piled up this
Yeah,
high.
I don't know any of this. But then we've got the root cabal, which is basically what Tracted started talking about earlier with the druid, because these are the ones that are the most isolated. They basically shun society to the extreme. They just live out in the nature. If they're going to be protecting something, it's going to be nature. Um, they might go hard on the anti-undead, trying to revert back to what is natural, killing the undead. Basically everything natural. That's a root cabal. They could be in a tree, in a mountain, lake, any natural setting would work very well for a root cabal.
Yeah, you know the trope. Tree huggers.
Yeah.
Basically, the stereotypical druid. Although, somewhat interesting as if I'm remembering the rules for Wild Shape correctly, that would get rid of their sigils.
I don't think so.
But the last cabal, I think it's the last cabal, is the Vengeance Cabal, which is basically an anti-Githyanki cabal, because in the lore, the Githyanki destroyed the Illumians' Library of the Sublime in the Astral Plane, and that was a bad move, Githyanki. You don't destroy libraries. So now there are cabals dedicated strictly to killing Githyanki.
Friggin' Gith Yankee, am I right?
Yeah.
Of course, it's definitely not the last cabal, because, like I mentioned, as the DM, you can totally make up all sorts of new cabals, whatever fits your story. It's fair game.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that would be pretty easy to do just using the base structure that we talked about earlier with like the black table, etc., etc.
Oh, super easy. So, Mike, what would you say if I'm thinking of using Illumians in my next campaign? What would be the biggest reason for me to do so?
Oh, I think that they are just easy to fit into just about any setting. I think the only way that you would have a hard time working them into a setting is if there's both no civilization and no nature. Because then what the hell are the Illumians doing there, right? They either need to keep tabs on somebody, like, learn about somebody, defend nature from something. Otherwise, they've just got no sources of power. I mean, you could always have an ascension cabal, but uh, you kind of need that to play a major role, or else they're not all that interesting. So I would say you'd want to use them because they're easy to incorporate, and you can let them take on as much of a role as you want by customizing it or using one of these cabals that we just went over.
I'd say another potential issue, or rather obstacle, for including Illumians and their cabals in your campaign is if you're trying for a low magic setting. Because they're not necessarily inherent spellcasters, but their very existence is tied to a powerful magical ritual. So that may or may not jive well with a low magic campaign.
I could see
So,
that, but I think that just because none of their inherent capabilities are really powerful magic, I feel like they could still work. I mean, it's just the fact that they have this glowing, sigil above their head is really the only magical thing about them.
so what I'm hearing is that if you're in a low magic world where there's not a lot of civilization and not a lot of nature, Illumians are maybe not a good fit. So, in other words, uh, they're difficult to incorporate into Dark Sun, is what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Or maybe a post apocalyptic thing.
Well, maybe they were just on the plane of shadow the whole time, and because like magic is all dissipated, they're having trouble getting back to the material plane.
That could be a thing.
I feel like instead of the plane of shadow, it should have been the astral plane, considering that's where their library was that was destroyed, and the fact that they're against the Githyanki. It's so weird that they're from plane of shadow,
Yeah.
or associated with, I should say, not from it.
Yeah, maybe
Honestly,
one of. No, go ahead.
I think it makes the most sense for them to just be tied to the material plane. I don't think the extra planar influence even makes sense at all. But if I were going to tie them to a plane, I would probably tie them to, like one of the lawful planes.
Maybe a plane, maybe one of the major magical planes, because again, the whole ritual existence thing.
I haven't put any thought into this, but I think I would have to choose one of the outer planes if I was gonna say that they were associated with anything. Probably, I'm not big on any religion settings in D&D other than the core setting free religion. So I don't know any of the Forgotten Realms deities, I don't know Eberron deities, etc., etc. So for me, when I see something like one of these races that gets their own chapter and they get their own religions, I generally just like skip right past it. So if I was gonna pick some other plane to associate them with, I would probably have to reread the religion section to figure out where these, uh, words made flesh deities should reside or would be most associated with.
I play most of my games nowadays in the Eberron setting, and I think if I were creating a new origin story for them in Eberron, I might try linking them with the Draconic Prophecy. It feels like it'd be, an interesting plot hook. Like, maybe some dragons kidnapping them or whatever, demons, etc. It's a thing.
Like, as far as Illumian religion goes, like a very large chunk of them do worship either the standard gods or no gods at all. The Ascended Illumians, like, well, as little as a quarter worship, as little as a quarter apparently worship the classic gods. But there's a large amount of, I don't want to say atheism, because the gods in most D&D campaigns do kind of explicitly exist.
Yeah, atheism would be a very strange thing in a standard D&D setting. It'd be like,
Yeah.
what do you mean you don't believe? They're right there, right there. Come play
Yeah, I
chess
just,
with
I
me.
just, I just talked to my god last Thursday. Had bacon and eggs for breakfast. Posted about it on Instagram. Oh, you're not following that?
Yeah. That is
Okay.
interesting that up to a quarter of them follow the standard pantheon. That would make it even easier to incorporate them. Don't even have to go out of your
Yeah.
way to learn the
Yeah,
other
there
deities.
are no specific numbers on this page for the other stuff, but it's really seems like the worship of the ascended Illumians, as opposed to just acknowledgement of their quasi deific status, is more of a niche thing. They do have portfolios and domains, though.
Yeah, they did not skimp on the details.
Yeah. The Races of X series. I think they did a pretty good job creating, unique pantheons for the races that have their own religion. If that's the sort of thing that you're into in your game. Okay, but there's something else I want to cover, and it's a bit of a 90-degree turn. But there was a playtest version of the Illumian that was released as a preview, and it was totally different. Have you guys seen this?
I've read about it, but it was a long time ago.
Yeah, I haven't seen the actual stat block, but I am aware of some of the artifacts of the old stuff that even still exists in the text today.
Yeah, so basically the original Illumian had 2 power sigils at level 1, but then they would get a new power sigil every 5 levels. So eventually they'd have 6 power sigils instead of the ones that they eventually published, which should only have a max of 2.
Huh.
And then the power sigils
Honestly,
all these different combos.
honestly, I think that probably would have been a bit more fun than just 2 sigils, period.
Yeah, but they also got a bunch of bonuses based on how many sigils they have. Like what did you say the final number was? 6?
Yep.
Yeah, eventually you get 6 at level 20.
Yeah,
And
so that
so
would go ahead.
yeah, in Races of Destiny, the bonuses the sigils give you are it's +1 to strength checks per power sigil you have, which is like it's always 2. So why wouldn't you just say +2? And the reason is because in the original version of the Illumian, you could have up to 6, and it could be this huge bonus.
Which just makes them even crazier as far as the skill monkey department, because a +2 in a whole bunch of skills is one thing, but now we're talking a potential +6 to all skills.
And not only that, but there were different sigils available, and some of them were really strong. Like there was one that gives a bonus to your effective level for the purpose of wild shaping. So you can wild shape as if you were like 5 levels higher and turn into more powerful animals. Or like there's another one that gives you what was it? Extra rages, extra. Oh, there's one that gives you spell resistance. No, wait, was it spell penetration? I don't know.
I'm seeing one for spell penetration, but there might also be a spell resistance one.
There was a bunch of stuff, and there were different combos, totally different combos, and you could have multiple combos. I think they made it so the combos didn't overlap, because that would have been just way too complicated.
Yeah.
But there was still like you could have eventually 3 different combo sigils. It was way more complicated, definitely more powerful. They did give it +1 level adjustment to compensate for it. But honestly, I think I'm glad they eventually went with the +0 level adjustment version because it feels like it's just easier to keep track of, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, this is. I mean, they're more powerful, but they're also more specialized. Like this one is a damage bonus for weapons you have weapon specialization with. This one's damage for unarmed strikes. This one increases favored enemy bonuses. Ooh, wow. Oh, okay. And this one's so powerful, even they felt the need to nerf it. Zeal. This sigil, which forms the Illumian word for death, grants extra dice of sneak attack damage equal to the number of sigils she has, divided by 2 and rounded up.
I mean, that's
Well,
not,
you know,
that's not too much.
I
Yeah,
actually forgot about that one.
Even they didn't think an extra 66 with your race alone was
Well,
too.
but it's divided by 2 though, so it's not so much.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They cut that one in half.
Anyway, we'll put the archive link to that page in the show notes for those of you who are interested in checking out how it used to be. Mike, you can do that.
Of course.
Yeah, let's do that.
So one thing that I did want to mention, even if only briefly, is uh, Eller Hondas, if that's even close to the correct pronunciation, of the Shadow Metropolis. This is the big shadow city. Plane of shadow city of Illumians, created by representatives of hundreds of cabals. So that's pretty interesting. Before you even get into where it is and what it looks like and everything, but just because usually the cabals are very isolated, they stick to themselves, etc. Everything we've talked about. They think they're the best, whatever. So you've got representatives from all these different ones coming together to make a city of Illumians. And it's, on the plane of shadow, which is strange, like we've said. But what makes it even better is, for some reason, it's surrounded by shadow volcanoes. And I feel like it's great fluff and everything, and I like it, and it's really amusing. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why? Volcanoes don't have anything to do with research. They're not getting any knowledge from these shadow volcanoes. I guess you could say it's to keep them safe, but I mean, it's not like the Githyanki live on the plane of shadow. So there's a distinct, or I should say, like a break here between everything else that the Illumians are and this shadow metropolis where they all come together. So yeah, just had to mention that.
Well, maybe they're measuring seismic and geological activity in the volcanoes. I mean, you never.
Sure, we'll go with that.
I'm on that page now, and how this apparently happened is Tarmuid literally just contacted all the cabals, told them to send one capable representative to this one particular place in the plane of shadow, and when they all got here, all he told them was build a city here.
Yeah.
And he left.
Do you think maybe it's like in Umbrella Academy where the abusive dad tells one of the kids, just, hey, go up on the moon and check it out, just see what you find.
So you're saying that Tormund is just kind of a dick then?
It's entirely possible, all right? I'm just saying.
It looks like that, actually.
It's like, haha, I ascended, you didn't. Do whatever I say. Illumians!
I want to give a quick rundown of some of the cool things that you can do with Illumians as a player character that they use for mechanically. So first off, paladins and other half-casters, they're really good for that because they can use the Crow Sigil combined with the strength and dex, really boost your spellcasting a lot. Then there's any sort of knowledge devotion type prestige class where you want really high knowledge checks. The intelligence sigil does a really good job on that. Any sort of theurge builds, like I mentioned before, improved sigil crow is a great way to get early entry to your theurge classes while also boosting your caster level for both of them. Clerics can benefit from it a lot because they basically have a built-in version of divine meta magic, except it works for any meta magic feat. So you can do your persist spell, but you can also use it for whatever. And just any sort of multi-class build where you're a spellcaster and you're like losing a caster level somewhere. Maybe you're taking a prestige class that drops level of casting, for example, and you just want to patch that up. Illumian is basically like you're getting practice spellcaster as a bonus feat, and then you also get some skill bonuses, which is very similar to being a human, but slightly different and better in some ways, slightly worse in others. Those are the main things that I personally use Illumians for.
uh, I know we've kind of gotten back into mechanics, but I just want to point this out. I went a little further into Races of Destiny, and there is literally a section of this chapter for random name generation with a bunch of Illumian syllables and percentile dice.
Oh yeah, they have that for like all the races.
No, yeah, they have that for stuff like names, but this is 100 different syllables for each potential result of percentile dice. And it's like roll 3 times and figure it out.
Oh, I see what you're talking about. Boy, you got to figure that's like a linguist nightmare, isn't it? It's like, no, these don't go together. That's not how language works.
Perhaps the one saving grace is that these syllables are at least in alphabetical order. Like, I. But anyway,
I know
You know what this means? I gotta roll 3 times and see what word we come up with here.
mechanically, there is one other thing in just their base racial stats that we didn't happen to mention at the beginning is their interaction with various writing-based magic, like, say, a glyph of warding or a symbol of death.
Oh yeah, that thing. It's like this weird resonance thing that happens, right?
Yeah, if the yeah, I'm just gonna read that section because it's relatively short. Glyphic resonance. Illumians are the physical embodiment of a magical language, so they interact strangely with symbol-based spells. This group includes all spells whose names contain the word glyph, rune, sigil, or symbol, such as explosive runes, glyph of warding, Sepious snake sigil, and the various symbol spells. When an Illumian encounters such magic, one of two things happens. Either the Illumian's resonance overpowers the spell, or the foreign magic corrupts the mystical language that defines the Illumian. Illumians have a -4 racial penalty on saving throws against these effects if their level is less than the caster level of the spell. If the Illumian's level equals or exceeds the spell's caster level, she is immune to the effect.
I think that's a neat, flavorful note. Like,
Oh,
just
absolutely.
yeah, I'm made of words, so word magic does weird things.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. All I have to say to that is Nathiamen.
Might as well go roll mine.
I got Julia. Yeah, I'm not sure how to say
That
it.
was much worse than what I got lucky. Mine was real easy to say.
Julia. I'm not. It's a EAIA phoneme at the
You
end.
must be part of the Gibber Canal attracted.
Let's see.
Apparently. Yeah, I hope you guys learned some cool stuff about a cool race from this cool book.
Okay, Debatra, I'm sorry. Your name looks an awful lot like a swear.
It's an Illumian swear, nonetheless.
Yeah, it sounds more like Orcish than Illumian.
Yeah.
Authructure.
Yeah.
Is that how you say it?
Othrakjar.
Othrukche. I'm not sure whether Illumians pronounce the CH as ch or sh.
Well, let's see. Othrakshur, Othrakchur.
I mean, they have
Othrakchur seems
They have an
to flow
SH,
better.
so.
Authructure, I barely know her.
Alright, so enjoy your Illumians in the next campaign you play. So, once again, that was Debatra,
Have a nice day, folks.
Troacted,
Thanks for listening.
Fantasy Pen,
Good night.
and as always, I'm your host, Mike. See you next time.